to the Business Leader podcast. My name is Serena, and today our guest was a computing, mathematics, and language child prodigy, passing 2 GCSEs in primary school and an A-level in computing at the age of 11. She then went on to be one of the youngest master's graduates from the University of Oxford at the age of 20. Since, she has forged an aspirational career, having had roles at Goldman Sachs, Hewlett-Packard and Deutsche Bank. Now, she is the co-founder and CEO of Stemettes, a social enterprise that promotes girls and non-binary people to get into STEM subjects. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to receive the latest episodes. We'd love to hear your feedback. Email questions@businessleader.co.uk to get in touch. And now it's time to welcome Anne-Marie Imafidon MBE to the podcast. Welcome, Anne-Marie. It's lovely to have you here, and really excited to speak to you about kind of all the exciting things that you're doing. So I just want to kind of backtrack to when you were younger, and obviously you had a very unique experience at school and kind of growing up. How would you describe growing up?
It was a lot of fun. Growing up, I'm the eldest of 5 in my house, and it was like 7 of us in one house, which meant there was never ever anywhere you could go where you're on your own. But we had a lot of fun. Like, we ate a lot. We had a lot of TVs. Like, it was good times. It is good times, really. And so that would be the word fun. Yeah, I had a very fun childhood. But of course, I guess from the outside, you could also use the word fast-paced. But inside, it didn't feel like that. It was kind of just, we're doing things at my pace, as things work for me at the siblings' pace, everyone else's. So yeah, a lot of fun. Fun, I think, would be the main word.
Did you have any role models at that time? Because obviously you were, very high achieving from quite a young age. Were there role models that encouraged you and enabled you at that time that sort of made you have that motivation?
So for me, it was less about the role models. I think, if I can point to anyone, I remember learning about Tim Berners-Lee because I was on the web a lot and thinking, he's a British physicist. I'm British too. Kind of physics, who knows what that is, but I like that kind of sciencey, mathsy stuff. So I remember thinking, that's cool that he made something that was so impactful and so worldwide. That's definitely something I could do one day. Like, why not? So I think if there's role models, that would be the person. But I think I've had more of the right kind of people who opened up opportunities rather than it being, I want to be like someone, or I have this now a lot in my work and in the book and everything. And kind of, if you can see it, you can be it. But I think for me, I could see the tech, I could see the logic, I could see the world around me and was trying to understand it. And that was my motivation. And the more I learned, the more I understood, the more I could make. And so it was less about the role models. It was more about the tech and the maths and, that logic and the creativity itself.
So would you say that you kind of went into STEM from that young age because of just your sheer kind of love and enjoyment for it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it for me, like I said, it was the creativity. So whether it was playing with databases, because you can put a lot of stuff in and you can organize it and get things out. I was fascinated with them age 10. Or before that, it was, typing stories on my dad's computer. And, age 4, it was probably gobbledygook, is what a 4-year-old can spell. But it was Red Riding Hood, but her hood was purple instead because I thought that was a better colour. And I'd save it in the computer. And, to this day, it's still quite a funny one that if you dug out wherever that computer is and plugged it in and waited ages, Word 3.0, there'd be 4-year-old Anne-Marie, staring back out at you. So I think for me, the motivation in going into STEM, even though I didn't know it was STEM, was about the exploration. It was about the learning. It was about the understanding. It was about, being able to logically apply things that you'd seen and you'd learn about databases or about the web or about whatever part of maths it was that, we'd looked at that week at school or elsewhere. And then being okay, here's what I can do because of that. And so for me, that was my creativity, and that's still what draws me to STEM, but that was kind of how I ended up in that space. And it was something that made sense, which I think is the other thing, even when we reflect on my experience at school, a lot of the stuff that you do in primary school is repetitive because that's what the learning is about, right? You do the timetables over and over and over again, or you work through geometry over and over and over again. And I remember being there and being okay, cool. You said this last year and it made sense when you said it last year. It still makes sense now. So I don't really need to hear that again. I'm just going to muck about with my mates instead and distract the class because we've already done this and I could explain it back to you as you wish. So that was it for me. It was a way to understand the world. It was a way to get creative. And that's still something that sticks with me today.
You mentioned there that you grew up in kind of a busy household. Was that with your family? And do you have sort of a lot of siblings, or who was in that household?
So I'm one of five. So it was me, my mum, my dad, and then the other four who all came after me. There were twins at one point, so there were a lot of people in nappies. So it was very busy, and they were really active in church as well. So there were always people around. There were always parties. There was always something happening in the house. Yeah.
And do you think that environment kind of impacted the way that you, I guess, like you thought about life, but also what would you say was the kind of driving factor in you, I guess, applying yourself at school, or sort of having that mentality that you wanted to achieve? Did you have that mentality?
Not really, no, it wasn't. There's not really, I mean, it's funny, it's nice because people ask, I did Countdown recently as well, and people are like, was that part of the plan? And I'm like, no, it's not really a plan. I try things out and I see where it goes, and I follow it to some sort of logical conclusion. And even then, not even really to a conclusion. I just kind of follow it and see how far it goes. So it was never like, oh, I want to be the youngest, or I really want to do this, or I want to do great at school. It was more, this is cool. Like, there's clearly more that I could do in this. Let me just do more. And so that was it, more than any like external forces or any expectations, like even up to doing the GCSEs. So, there was part of me that was like, yeah, my cousin's 4 years older than me. And like you always want to, watch TV shows that your cousins are watching or whatever. And I remember them, this GSCE, GESC thing. And I remember being like, okay, cool. Yeah, like that could be the next step. That's the next stage. And I remember doing it because I wanted to be like my cousins, and not really assuming or kind of taking for granted that I was going to pass it. So I was as surprised as everyone else was when the results came back. They was like, yeah, you passed it, because it was like me, like a 10-year-old writing this exam. And so, I clearly like to do things and get things done, but I'm not like, I must achieve, or I must be the first, or I must. Like, it's not really the way I live my life, actually. Yeah, it's not really what my motivations obviously evolve as you get older, but I think, for me, I'm just here for a good time.
Oh, amazing. Because I definitely think that, when you hear about someone so young achieving such high results and things that other, kids their age aren't achieving, you do perhaps assume that there is potentially a pressure coming from around them, or, that motivation might come from them wanting to sort of achieve things because of their parents might pressure into it, or they feel inside themselves that they have to achieve something. But I think it's like, it's interesting and refreshing that you just kind of followed what you were good at and stuck with it. And then that's kind of what's led to
doing this stuff. Yeah, I think for me, I was following along and doing it at my pace and enjoying what I was doing. Like, no one can get me to do anything I don't want to do. That's still a thing that's like now, like my parents, still annoys my parents actually now, but there's a lot of things that they'd wish I was doing that I'm like, no. So I think, for me, it's always, I genuinely enjoy the maths, I genuinely enjoy the tech, I enjoy the ICT, I enjoy learning, I enjoy trying new things, I enjoy applying what I've learned. So all of that has been what's driven it. And, once you've passed GCSEs, what's next? A-levels, right? And so I think that was it. I mean, in many ways, there are lots of subjects that I dislike. So I really didn't like English, for example. And so the more I was doing the maths, the less time I was spending on English. So like win-win. But no pressure or anything like that externally. I think it's definitely something that has meant that maybe the stereotypes that folks might think of kind of hot housing, child genius, child pressure, even child actors just aren't things that have played out for me in life, because this is like me. It's just what I'm like.
With the work that you do with Stemettes, that's kind of a passion project. It's a social enterprise. So where did the motivation to start that come from in the first place?
So I think what motivates me now and what motivated me to start Stemettes are kind of slightly different but connected. So I have always been into this maths, like we kind of said. Have often been the only girl in the room, and for me, going off into industry, working, I really, really enjoyed it because I was being paid now to do all the stuff I would have done anyway, age 10. But it was a conference that I ended up at actually at the end of 2012. So almost 10 years ago, almost actually. And I turned up at this conference in the States. So I was asked to speak on something in particular, and kind of, it was like free trip to America. Whoop, so let's go. Turned up at the conference. It was 3,500 technical women at this one conference. And I remember turning up there and being like, oh my goodness, I've never seen anything like this in my life. It's not even something I was missing or knew I was missing, but how crazy, right? That this is the first time I'm in a majority female environment. We're all technical, like whether it was data scientists, whether it was developers, whether it was, people working in cyber, all the rest of it. And there was a keynote at the conference, and this lady was talking about how in the US, the number of women engaging in tech had been in free fall over the last, decades or so. And so her call to the audience was, you all as women, please stay. Here's reasons to stay, and recruit just one friend. Like that was what she said. And so I remember thinking, this is really interesting. Maybe it's an American problem. Getting back to the UK and looking back and being like, no, there were 3 of us on my course of 70 in these computer science lectures. I'm often the only woman in a lot of the meetings I'm in at work, and so being like, okay, cool. This is not a US problem. We've got it here in the UK. Someone should do something about it because I'm having a ball. I'm earning really well. I'm able to influence. I'm listened to. I'm promoted. Like, it can't just be me here in this space. That's not right. And so I ended up doing a little bit more reading, a little bit more research into it, and seeing that, it's a problem that has implications for us economically, it has implications for us, ethically, societally, politically. And so decided to do something about it for, personally, my unborn children. Still haven't had children, but if I ever have anyone, I don't want them to be like, oh my goodness, my mom's the one weirdo woman left in tech. But if I have any daughters, I want them to feel like it's an option for them. But now it's evolved a little bit more to, when you dive a little bit deeper into these things, and like I said, there's a lot of implications when technology is so ubiquitous, when it's driving so many decisions that are made across society, that are made on products that people use every day, that are that are restricting their rating, all these kinds of things, that actually us not having women in the room, us not having different types of voices in the room, means that we're doing more harm than we need to. And actually, if we don't work hard to change these things around, we might end up with this dystopian, Terminator 2, Black Mirror, whatever kind of eventuality, without realizing and without that necessarily being the intentions of what we had as an industry. And I love technology. I love being a technologist. I want to be proud of the legacy that we've left, rather than, having to hang your head in shame of, the weird things that we're seeing with robots, or the weird things we're seeing with AI, or, some of the implications that we're seeing of even, if we want blockchain, or, the fact that we've now created a metaverse and there's already assaults happening in a metaverse. It's like, it was bad enough that was happening outside of the metaverse. Now we've created a whole nother world of extra problems, and we're creating problems faster than we're solving them. And so I think for me, that's still my motivation. Like, I still don't think it's too late for us to reverse these things. And that's why it's kind of the subheader of the book, for women to take back tech, and for us to all be a part of these decisions as they're being made, because the implications are so far reaching. And so that's my motivation now on a daily basis, whether it's Stemettes, whether it's me, popping up on Countdown, whether it's any of the boards that I'm involved with. So I'm a trustee at the Institute for the Future of Work. I'm on the G7's Global Partnership for AI. I'm on the Council of Research England, like all these places, to just be able to nudge and be like, okay, systemically, let's try to not end up in this dystopian ending, because if we don't change things up, that probably is where we're going to end up.
Why have women and girls typically been kind of excluded from STEM subjects and from these industries?
So I cover this in the book a fair amount, but I think it's when we started Stemettes, we were talking a lot about the social norm that we have around technical women and their existence, and the fact that actually if you ask someone to name a scientist or name a technologist, no offense at all to any dead white men that listen to the podcast, but it is a dead white man, probably with a beard, that ends up being mentioned and ends up being drawn out. And that's not to say that dead white men haven't contributed quite a lot to what we have in science, technology, engineering, and maths, but there's a lot of people that have contributed to that. There's a very rich STEM history that we have as well, whether it's GPS, whether it's Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, whether it's bulletproof vests. Like, there's a lot of things, whether it's the flight receiver in Concorde. Like, there's a lot of things that women have done that they've contributed to, many of which we still use every day and on a daily basis. But there's been a very overt erasure of those stories, erasure of that that kind of narrative of those different archetypes. And it's something we then don't see in our headlines. We don't see in our storytelling. We don't see in our own collective histories that we have of society. Even here in the UK, there were women in the 1960s who were housewives who were coding from their kitchen tables. And when we think 60s, we think, Twiggy, miniskirts, that's it. And it's like, no, these women were genuinely, we still have stock control systems and bus timetables that were built by these women, but no one can consider, can comprehend. No one's got that as part of their psyche. And the reason why, well, there are lots of different things that we can point to. Sometimes it's just, a marketing decision made by, the gaming industry a couple of decades back. Other times it's part of a really intentional post-war effort to build back Britain, on this ICT, as it was referred to then in kind of government documentation. And actively saying, actually, there is a housewife and the men that are coming back need to have something to do. And so we're going to get those wives to train the people that then end up taking over from them, which is what happened a lot, actually, in the 60s, which is why we ended up having them coding from home. So there's quite a lot of intentional things that have happened, but I think it's one of those things that, you end up inheriting this as a culture. You end up inheriting that thing if women just don't do that, even though they really do and they'd be really good at it. And we're all losing out by not having them as part of those technical decisions that we're making. So, whatever has happened already, it's like it's time to change, time to evolve, time to look forward and say, actually, no matter what we did say, we do need those women now in these spaces. We need lots of different types of people in these spaces. And what are we going to do from the top, right? As a business leader, what am I going to do to ensure that my culture is set up for them to be accepted, for them to be celebrated, for them to thrive, and then for my business to thrive as a result of having that diverse workforce?
This specific issue of, representation, especially in the tech sector, a lot of it, isn't just to do with the fact that women haven't necessarily been given the opportunity of it, but even when women have been given the opportunity, the way that we've reported on it historically has been kind of inaccurate. And then that has led to this sort of, as you say, like erasure. And therefore this has this kind of like pervasive trickle down effect of like now when the way that we perceive STEM subjects and technology and, what is the norm of that is warped, I suppose, to some extent.
Yeah. So I think erasure plays a big part, but I think the knock-on effect of that very intentional erasure. So those women were there, but we just haven't told those stories. We've chosen not to tell those stories. And so there's been a knock-on effect, because then that means that if you're turning up today in the IT industry, or if you're turning up today, as a business leader, whatever you're doing with your technology, your assumptions, right, your baselines that you're checking against mean that actually if a woman does turn up, you're less likely to think that she's going to be competent, you're less likely to want to listen, you're less likely to want to value. And there are lots of examples that we have of kind of some of the extremes maybe of this, where, I get sent stories all the time, for the position that I'm in, where people are telling me all kinds of things. I get to talk to a lot of different companies and I get to see a lot of the dynamics, and it is people being undermined, it is people being overlooked, it is people not being recruited, it's people not being paid well and paid properly, it's people not being put in positions of responsibility that should be, and it's happening wholesale because those who do have that power, those who are leaders, aren't leading as if they should be in that space. So whether it's the example, from the 1700s of Marie-Sophie Germain, the mathematician who initially had to write under a male alias because they didn't think women could do maths at that point, who ended up, being instrumental with elasticity, with string theory, which was how the Eiffel Tower is still standing today. And they've got 72 names of scientists and engineers around the Eiffel Tower, and her name is not one of them, because at that point they knew she was a woman and thought it'd be untoward to have her there. Right through to the fact that, every couple of years the technology industry rediscovers the period for the very first time. And it's like, hey guys, there's this thing called the period, and some people have a period sometimes, did you know? And they, they end up building these features. They go through design, they go through implementation, they go through rollout, they'll market it in a really big way. And they'll kind of add it into the fitness tracker, and it'll be like, we're going to track the period. So did you know some people have periods? Did you know we've discovered this? And did you know we've now added it as a new feature in? And we had this a couple of years ago where it only tracked 10 days of the period. And it's a really interesting one to kind of consider, that you've gone through that whole process, and this is a period tech company or period tech feature, period tech teams that have gone through and have done this, and they've discovered the period for the very first time. they've rolled it out and it only tracks 10 days. And, you know, I have to ask the listener, like, maybe you do know why that's a problem, maybe you don't. I mean, it'd be interesting to know how many people you can kind of check with why is 10 days of a period tracking not great. But can you imagine in that whole process, not a single person had ever had a period or met anyone that had a period. And that was how it went through all those teams and was released out onto the market. Or they did have people that had met folks that had periods, or maybe even some people that had a period before that just weren't listened to and weren't valued in that conversation. And if we're not doing that in a very period-specific space, where else are we not valuing? Where else are we not hearing these ideas? Where else are we restricting our own innovation? Because we have a really narrowly defined vision of what is of value and of what success could look like and who can contribute to that success. And I think that's where it kind of ends up fitting through, that if you've never valued what a woman said, if you've never seen a woman who knows what she's talking about technically, why would that be something you then would kind of have your whole business culture built on? You know, another example I can give from my own experiences, but as I said to you, I've been obsessed with databases since I was 10. You know, I remember working on a particular one at one of my jobs and ending up at an offsite where we were trying to, you know, deal with a really big issue with this system that we were using that was run by this database. I knew the database inside out because that's kind of my thing. And so it was like, you know, we could use this flag, we could use this, we could use that, and then write it and we'd be fine. And the person that was leading the session was a bit like, why would she know what she's talking about? Kind of dismissed it out of hand. And then about half an hour later, there was like a contractor in the room who'd been reading through the documentation, was like, actually, no, this flag is here. Actually, what Anne-Marie said we could use, we should just use that. And we don't need to build this convoluted system that you spent 20 minutes trying to build. And it's things like that where it's like, you know, I'd said the right thing in the right space, in the right meeting, but because I had said it, and it's hard to unpick, is it because I was young? Is it because I was female? Is it because I was black? Is it because I've got a great East London accent? Like, what of those, is it a combination of all the above, has meant that I've not been heard, not been valued, and we've literally wasted half an hour in this offsite now with this person literally feeling like they're on a hidden camera show because the little black girl in the corner knew what she was talking about more than he did. And it's all of these small things that end up adding up to people leaving the industry, right? People not wanting to contribute in the way that they know that they can, but also us not having the right kind of innovation that, again, solves more problems than it's creating. So yeah, really, really important, actually.
That's a really big kind of thing to remember, I think. Like when we are thinking about like trying to get women into STEM subjects and STEM areas, is that also ultimately, you know, as a business person as well, your ultimate kind of desire is to fulfill a need in society.
Yeah.
And there are so many needs that,
exactly.
you know, half of the population have that aren't necessarily being filled.
Yeah.
There are so many new technologies and inventions that could kind of come out of those needs being filled, which ultimately aren't being filled, I suppose.
Exactly.
So there's a potential for innovation there, which, you know, even if you don't fully see the benefits in having a more diverse boardroom. I mean, and surely you'd hope everyone would see the benefits of that. But from a kind of profit-driven sense, like that there are many needs that need to be filled.
There are.
You know, and potential for innovation.
Yeah.
Coming to your work with Stemettes, can you describe a little bit about how the opportunity came about to kind of like build Stemettes and then create all of the different, the network that you've created essentially?
Yeah, so if we remember the kind of conference from earlier, so I got back home from this conference, saw that we had the same problem across the UK and decided to kind of boil down the experience I'd had at the conference to something a little bit smaller, a little bit more British, because there's an American way of doing things, there's a British way of doing things, and also dial down the age group. So the conference itself was for students and for people in industry. And I was like, you know, if young people, if during your formative years, you got to have this kind of experience, STEM experience, all female, majority female STEM experience, to have this connection, to feel, you know, like one of many. I wonder how many folks, you know, that would impact the decisions that they make, that would impact their view of the world and also their view of themselves. So Stemettes then came out of me blogging about this for a while. So the months after I came back from the conference, I blogged about it, spoke to a lot of people that I knew across industry, spoke to a couple of folks who were already trying to do something about it, and then decided, hey, you know, let's take this board down version. It was a panel, a hackathon, and a show, an exhibition. and let's run a pilot year almost. So it was the Stemettes project in 2013 initially that I kind of did on the side of my job, was really enjoying my job. That was great. And was like, yeah, why not? On the weekends, on the side, why don't I try this thing? Other people take up yoga. I took up the Stemettes project and got to the end of the first year. In fact, 11 months in, we were then at number 10 at a round table with, I think at that point it was Michael Gove and David Willett. We were the disruptors, called the Disruptors in the Corner, talking about this. And this is what I'm saying, this is a problem of national and international importance. The fact that within 11 years, the Stemettes project was there, in the Cabinet Office discussing these things, talking about, the glut of teachers that we have, how we've got shortcomings and skills gaps across it all. And so kind of got to the end of the first year and was like, that's interesting. This is a thing, but I like sleeping. I have a job, most people take up yoga. This has become I actually called it a monster for the first, year or so. Cause I was like, this thing has taken on a life of its own. I wouldn't have imagined I'd be here. And so actually said I was going to close down the Stemettes project. I was like, it's been a year. I've done a couple of bits and, it is what it is. I've been really open about it. So if folks want to use what we've said and what we've done, they can do. And had a couple of people come back and be like, no, my kid is relying on you now. Right? No. And so ended up saying, okay, cool, right, let's get some funding in and let's do this, let's get it going. So 10 years later, it'll be 10 across 2023. It's a team of about 20 and it's on-demand services and support. It's short-term to kind of up to a week, maybe, interventions and events and opportunities. And then it's long-term cohorts and networks of young people, whether it's in their school clubs, whether it's in mentoring, whether it's gaining certifications in Python, Agile, and cyber. And, the strapline is that we're engaging, informing, and connecting the next generation of women and non-binary people to STEM and to STEAM, which is the science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths fields, showing the diversity of role models across, industry, academia, and entrepreneurship. But the whole aim is really, before you're 25, there's a lot of decisions that you end up making that have impacts on the rest of your life and the decisions that you make. Before you're 25, you're forming your view of yourself, of STEM, of those options. And before 25, you're coming kind of to it clean, right? Without as much baggage maybe as you might have as an adult who now looks back fondly or not, right? On the maths lessons or science lessons. And so during our formative years, what are really powerful interventions that we can do to ensure that these young people do end up making an informed decision about STEM? So rather than saying, I'm a girl, I won't do it, it's like, well, okay, this is not the problem I want to solve, and so therefore STEM is not something I'm going to pursue. Or this is a problem I'm going to solve, I'm going to study the politics, or I'm going to study arts, and I'm also going to take along these STEM skills because they enrich what I'm able to do and what I'm able to achieve. So we're solving that problem. As you mentioned, network there. Often girls still, unfortunately, are the only in their physics class. I remember when we were at that number 10 roundtable, the stat at that point was that half of the schools in the country didn't have a single girl doing A-level physics. Mm-hmm. And so it's okay, that means you literally feel like you're the only in your school, but you're not the only in the country. And so how do we connect these people together? How do we allow them to share math strokes? How do we get them to share tough conversations they're having with peers and teachers in the classroom? How do we get them to share with their parents why being a games designer is going to lead to something, probably prosperous and probably fulfilling, rather than it just looking like they're just drawing pictures for the sake of drawing pictures. And so it's ended up being a network of those young people. We have our Stemettes Society, which is the online community. We have our newsletters. We have events that they can come along to. We have the youth board. There's all kinds of opportunities that they have to build STEM and STEAM skills, to build those core skills, and really importantly, to build a network that can enhance their staying power. Because as we've said, there's a lot of things that women end up facing in the industry. And if you've got a network, if you've got your mentors, if you've got people around you, you're much more likely to kind of have the resilience to stay and make the change that we need to see despite the environment that you're in. And so that's been the power and the fun and the impact of Stemettes. So it's been more than 60,000, I think, at this point over the last 10 years of young people across the UK and Ireland who have had Stemette experiences, whether that's in a club, whether that's in a school trip, whether that's at an event, whether that's coming to see the Mercedes F1 team up close and get to see the cars, whether it's working with GCHQ and MI5 and MI6. There's all these opportunities and people that they've got to meet that they wouldn't have seen, and that Hollywood, TV, sometimes parents, often peers would say don't exist. but they've got to see all of them. And so that's been the power of Stemettes. That's what that's all been about and continues to be about as we head into our 10th year.
And you mentioned in that kind of initial growth period, you sort of reached out for funding and raised funds for Stemettes. What was that experience like, and how did you go about navigating that? Because typically, I think, that's a challenge that a lot of female business owners do really face is raising funds and kind of getting that recognition. So what was your experience of that?
So as a social enterprise, we ended up going down a slightly different route from needing to raise funds and kind of generate investment. So I wasn't actually full-time on Stemettes until maybe 2-3 years into the journey. So I was still working. We were being paid to provide the services that we were doing. So it was effectively bootstrapping, but with, I guess you could say, like really good market fit, where we had funders, we had people that were willing to pay for what we were delivering. We had people that were willing to pay for kind of marketing alongside whatever we were doing. We had people that are willing to fund and sponsor and also donate. So it has been 10 years of that kind of thing, whether it's statutory funding, whether it's from private foundations, whether it's from corporates and companies who just know that they've got a problem on their hands and they want to invest in the future. That's how it's been, rather than needing to raise, do a seed round and do a Series A or anything like that. So that's taken the pressure off a little bit. I know definitely not working full-time at Stemettes at the beginning meant that, we could work a little bit more and be more flexible on that front. But even now, we've got a proven model. We've got a lot of alumni. We've got a lot of engagement. We've got a lot of, other benefits for people that work at these companies that engage with us. And so actually that has been more than enough. And we haven't needed to go out and have that fight with a VC, or try and pitch. And it's not to say we haven't had those discussions. I mean, I remember turning up at one investment conference that I was invited to speak at. And then having folks you get booked in, right, to kind of speak to people afterwards. And we run an incubator called Outbox, where we give young people funding for their business ideas. And I remember being sat down with this guy who was like, okay, cool, right? So it's young girls and businesses. So it's all like what? Tell me beauty, makeup, that kind of thing. And me being like, no, but also, why am I in this meeting with you? I don't sit with you and have to explain to you that girls like things other than beauty and makeup. And so, it's been really, I get to see it, but from the side, I get to see our young people also growing their businesses, but it's not something we've had to engage with or fight against. But it's definitely something I broached on my podcast, Women Tech Charge, got to speak to lots of folks about that. And I know it's a problem. It's just not been the path. I think it is important actually to talk about that, because not everything is about, raising investment. You can build businesses in other ways. And actually I've really enjoyed doing it the way that we've done it.
And would you say that your motivations kind of as the business has grown have changed, both in a professional perspective, but even in your own personal life? Kind of how do you maintain that motivation kind of despite all odds?
So the motivation, the overall aim hasn't changed. It still is that trying to avoid Black Mirror, Terminator 2 eventuality. I think day to day, it's tough. Managing a team of 21 people is also fun, right? During post-pandemic or post-lockdown and, hybrid, all these new ways of working, and human beings are human beings, they're not algorithms or computers. So I think for me, the motivation is the time I get to spend with the young people. And so I do that as much as I can. So yesterday, actually, I think I was on a session we had with an engineer and I was hosting it, and you get to hear from them directly and you get to see connections being made, you get to see advice, you get to see names and, young people coming back and people being like, I was at the very first one. And, or results day, it happens. And then you get a load of messages of, you remember when we were, I didn't get the grades I wanted. And now I've got a first class and I'm, off to be a software developer here. And, I want to come back and help. And I think that then is the motivation of seeing the impact that we are having in these formative years, seeing how these young women and young people are going into industry with a completely different definition of success, but highly skilled, highly competent, highly confident. I mean, I'm worried for the industry, really, because we're unleashing these Stemettes on them. And, I'll get messages and it'll be like, hey, Anne-Marie. And I'm like, hey. They're like, that job, that company I told you about, I quit it. But actually, I've started this thing up and, we've got the funding for this and I just want your advice on this. And I'm like, hang on a second, rewind. You quit? What happened? And they're like, oh, well, they weren't listening and, they didn't believe me that I knew this. And, I know what I know. And it's things like that where it's like, okay, cool. And now she's built, an alternate VR startup outside that's doing really well. And you've got to think, so my kind of message to business leaders is don't go the way of Kodak. They're coming. these guys, these folks, this next generation, they've seen problems and they know that it's not just about profit and status. They know that there's a wider impact, there's wider, leverage that you can have in work and in what we do and in what we create. And if you're not meeting the standards, they're going to build something outside and, make sure you're not going the way of Kodak, right? Make sure you are listening, make sure you are evolving, make sure you are iterating, make sure that you are valuing the right people in your organization, not just the brilliant jerks who remember the days of Fortran. And so therefore, everyone now is at the mercy of them just because they know one thing very well, cultivating the right kind of cultures for lots of different people to be able to thrive. Because otherwise, I'm on the Stemettes side.
And as you mentioned that, technology is evolving so much. And I think you also mentioned kind of the threats of various technological developments like the metaverse and AI, but also in the working world, people are really kind of conscious of the impact that these technological developments can have on taking people's jobs or even just society and the environment as well. There are a lot of different, threats for the future. Do you have an opinion on what kind of the biggest or sort of scariest threat might be in the technological world in the future? Or are you not particularly worried?
No, so I don't think it's one threat. I wouldn't say, AI is the biggest threat or robotics is the biggest threat or the metaverse or Bitcoin or whatever, or blockchain. I think for me, the threat is not having the right people and not having the right considerations as we roll out this technology. I'm a trustee at the Institute for the Future of Work, and there's some case studies we released a couple of years ago looking at, everything we do is fourth industrial revolution. So all these technologies, a lot of them are data driven and the impact that they're having on the workplace. And we looked at the impact that, using algorithms to hire, using algorithms to recruit, to kind of promote, using algorithms to manage a workforce and allocate shifts and decide promotions and pay, and the implications it has of just allowing the technology to do what the technology has been created to do without any checks, balances, considerations, impact assessments, or any real accountability for that technology being rolled out. So I think for me, the biggest challenge is going to be, it's actually for the industry, and it's like, we can't be as arrogant as we have been up until this point. Like, knowing the computer science doesn't mean the scenarios and the use cases that it's being applied in. And so we can't arrogantly be like, this AI is going to tell you if the person is trustworthy. Because it's like, how do human beings know that that person is trustworthy? How have you taught the AI what trustworthy looks like? Is it based on phrenology, which is something that supposedly we threw out ages ago, right? What is it based on? Have you got the right kind of data? Also, if a human being's not able to tell who's trustworthy, if you've got an AI now doing that billions of times a second, what are we multiplying up? Like, is that really something we want to be doing? And what are the implications? And who's thinking about how we do that billions of times a second and what the implications of that look like versus, even though it's analog and it's slow and it's human, versus a human doing that and making that one mistake at a time. So I think that's my biggest fear. That's the biggest challenge that I have to the industry is there's way too much arrogance. Like, just because you know the computer science doesn't mean you know all of it. And so where are we thinking about our own accountability, our own checks and balances, and the fact that this isn't just deterministic in like a closed space and in a vacuum. This is affecting real lives. This is impacting what people are paid. This is impacting, the way the resources are being shared. This is impacting, when people are getting things that they really need for real life, in health circumstances, in work circumstances, financially, right? These are really serious decisions that are being made. And so we can be a little bit blasé, we can be a little bit, we don't take it as seriously as we really should because we're so excited about that technology that we're forgetting that actually there's real human beings on the end of this. And so for me, that's the challenge is, it's great to have that pace of innovation, and I put it in air quotes, that pace of innovation, but at what cost? And how are we counting that cost? From what perspective are we, saying, okay, that's the person that's going to bear that cost, rather than just selling because we want to sell and make all the money and do all the things. Like, what's the point if, the planet ends up on fire anyway? So I think that's the biggest challenge is whether it's metaverse, whether it's NFTs, whatever the new thing will be out. I'm sure by December it'll be another thing by the time folks are listening to this. But what's the cost? What's the implications? What's the impact assessment we've had on that? And who is accountable for all of these things as they happen? Because I talk about this in the book a lot. Like, there's already a lot of fallout that we're seeing there's a reason why the robots haven't taken our jobs yet, right? There's a lot of issues we're having in computer vision, in learning, in perception of different things for the algorithms. And if we're not there yet, should we really be trusting them to do so many of the use cases that is now sprawling across life as we know it? So I think that's the biggest challenge, is being wise and being smart about the rollout of these technologies and the selling of them, rather than just doing it because of the excitement of being a computer scientist that can solve all the problems right off the bat, based just purely on computer science knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think with technology, it can often feel as this thing that exists outside of humanity that we've had kind of no control over, but in reality, ultimately, we have created these things,
exactly.
and how we create these things will have that impact on future generations,
exactly.
on the planet,
exactly.
and that kind of thing.
And what's a legacy? What are the decisions we can make today that ensure that we can have a legacy that we're proud of tomorrow? So, I mean, a lot of folks will remember Knight Rider watching this, and remember in the 80s, it was such a futuristic thing to be able to talk to your car. So I think it was Michael with the car kit, and Michael would talk to the car. Not only would the car hear what you were saying, but they'd be able to successfully fight crime together. And it's a funny one to think that then that was so futuristic. Whereas now, we talk to inanimate objects all the time, right? We're constantly talking to Siri or getting Alexa to order new loo roll. And it's how funny is it that those kind of excitements and that creativity and the priorities almost of that generation that watched that has meant that we've got these things now. And so actually, the decisions that you make now are going to have that impact fairly quickly. And so how can you make a decision that you're going to be proud of? How are we going to have a legacy that we're proud of as technologists? Where at the moment, I'm not sure how many of us can say we're proud of what's going on. And, whether it's the bullying, whether it's, the lack of redistribution of resources, whether it's concentration of power, whether it's overturning of governments, that, and instability that's being created, like all of that's come from decisions that we've made where we haven't thought about the wider implications of what we've released. So yeah, that's my biggest worry for now. That's why I leave the house every day. If not, I just stay at home.
Yeah, definitely. And I can imagine that's a really big kind of driving factor behind your motivation. Mm-hmm. But I do just want to speak a little bit about kind of your own leadership style. Do you ever have moments where you have self-doubt or, negative self-talk, and how do you deal with that? So
not quite negative self-thought, no, or even imposter syndrome. I think for me, it's an interesting one where, a lot of the spaces that I'm in, other than maybe Stemettes, which I created, a lot of spaces I'm in, I've been invited into. And so actually for me, it's like there's always a reason that I've been invited in. Maybe I do know, maybe I don't know. And so I always know that there's some sense of value that I can bring. I know what I do know. I know the experiences I have had. I know the network that I have, and I know the closeness that I have to our Stemette community. And so I always know that there's something that I can bring of value in a lot of the arenas that I'm in. But I think for me, it's not negative self-talk. I think it's more just, say this, one of my bosses said this to me, early on in my career, Anne-Marie, people are messy. And I think as someone who's a mathematician and computer scientist, like everything's deterministic and incredibly logical. Human beings are not, and you never know what's going on. So, I could say hello to someone tomorrow and say it in the same way that I said hello to someone today and get a completely different response. And it's got nothing to do with the hello I said. It's got a lot to do with what else might be going on because they're a human being and there's all these factors. So I think for me as a leader, that's the only time when it's like, okay, this is like a tough thing that I'm trying to understand. Where is this person's joy, or what's getting in the way of this person, or how do we build a system or a culture that allows different types of people to thrive, and how do we evolve that? Because what thriving looked like in 2010 is not what thriving looks like now in 2020 and then in 2022 and post-pandemic. There's all these things that are happening. So I think for me, it's not quite negative self-talk. It's more, where do I solve this? Like I'm a problem solver. So it's like, okay, cool. Who do I talk to? What do I need to get? What am I preempting? What demo do I need to look at? Is there a technology that can help solve this problem, if we consider it properly? And so that's my thing. I'm always on the, how do we solve this? Or do I need to just give them time? Because sometimes human beings just need time. So that's ended up being my leadership style, but also empowering people in my team to do what they need to do. I can't do everything myself. There's only 24 hours in a day, only 7 days in the week, right? And so yeah, sometimes it does need to be trusting your team to do what they need to do, knowing that then I can turn up, and if I've given them the right tools, the right structures, the right support, and set the right example, then, I've got to trust in my system, trust in my people, trust in the example I've given them, and the norms that I've set in the spaces that I operate in. in order for that to kind of work out. And if it doesn't, we go again. Really iterative, build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn.
Yeah, no, that seems like a really kind of positive perspective to have. But in terms of kind of when you experience sort of failure and adversity in your life, are there kind of any moments in time that come into mind, and how did you deal with that when it happened? Or how do you deal with that?
On a daily basis, I make mistakes and there's failures. I wouldn't believe anybody who says they've never had a failure or never had to deal with it. I mean, I heard something a couple of weeks ago that failure is the first step to success, and I definitely see it that way. I think with that build, measure, learn thing as well, for me, I'm constantly looking for the failures. I'm almost like suspicious actually if something happens and things don't go wrong. So I think for me, I live in the failures. Like I enjoy that because that's kind of, you hit the ground, right? And you know to build back up to know then that you've succeeded. So if something just works, then I'm like, did it work? Was it going to work anyway? What is this? So I really enjoy the failures. And whether it's, not putting the right date on a quote, so you end up paying, being paid, last year's rate for something this year, whether it's hiring decisions that we've made that actually we really shouldn't have had that person in the team. The week before lockdown was announced in 2020, we had a load of schools in one of the regions that we work with a lot were closing down. And so we kind of saw it coming. So we're like, we're going to run 12 weeks, which we then extended for an extra week. So 13 weeks worth of online activities for the Stemettes community for free, and send laptops out and the rest of it. And our very first session with the really young ones, we decided to do origami as part of this math session. And, an hour later, with the kids still trying to just fold a square piece of paper now into half 8 times, it's like, at this point, we're like almost crying, laughing on the session because we're like, this has not gone right. And you learn those things. It's like, this was a complete failure. This is half an hour where they asked the role model loads of questions, but no one has this like little origami thing that we're supposed to have to beautifully show some part of like mathematical geometry. So you have failures all the time. But what do? You're like, okay, cool. Maybe next time we do origami, it's for in-person only. Maybe we don't do that, or maybe we choose a slightly different one that only involves one fold rather than one that has one fold 8 times and then another, tucking in. And so there's always failures, there's always mistakes. You'll always turn up and be like, why didn't I bring it on a USB stick? Or, why don't we not have the address so that we don't have all these people turn up? We only give it to people that have onboarded. So life's an iteration, like you live and you learn. And if you make no mistakes, there's no learning going on. And as we know, like I love learning, right? So I think that's it, like constantly experimenting. And if you frame it as well as an experiment, you're like, I don't know if this is going to sink or swim. Then when it sinks, you're like, okay, cool. Like, let's go again. What did we learn? Again, I don't know if this is going to sink or swim. If it sinks again, you're like, okay, cool. 3rd round, let's go again. Like, what's this going to be? So that's definitely my approach to failures. And there'll be lots of things that go wrong literally on a daily basis. Like there's always fires to be putting out. But as a business leader, I think you already know that, right? You already have that as part and parcel, and it's how you manage the failures rather than trying to avoid them wholesale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think it seems as though you don't get too emotionally attached to that failure, and kind of just having that mentality of realizing it's a part of the process is really important in sort of not getting too upset about it in the first place, and kind of just taking it as a notch on your belt for a lesson to be learned.
Exactly. There's always a lesson learned. I think it's one of those things, again, I'm very efficient in my brain, so I won't often remember the whole failure. I'll remember the lesson learned. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then that's it. It's like, we just don't do that anymore. We just put dates on quotes. And very rarely will it be like, yeah, there was that one person that happened, or there was that origami session. I mean, the origami session was hilarious. Hilarious to remember. But now it's like, yeah, we just don't do origami on virtual sessions. So I think that has to be the approach, because otherwise you can't really lead, right? You'd be upset every day, every hour, because there's always something going wrong, because there is. It's just like a fact of life. I don't need to tell you or the listeners that, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think we're coming to sort of the end of the recording, and at the end of every podcast we take questions from the audience, and this episode our questions are sponsored by some students from Queen Ethelburga's, and they have some questions from you.
Awesome.
So if we just want to take the first question.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Dr. Anne-Marie. My name is Hansen, and I'm a student in QE. So my question for you is, what do you think is the reason that the science community is not diverse enough? And how can I, as someone not in the field, help to change the phenomenon?
Hi, Hansen. So great question. 2-part question as well, like a good 2-in-1. I think the reason that the science community is not diverse enough is because science has been seen as a field that's been kind of supported by those in power and used to support those in power. So if we look historically over the years, there's lots of different discoveries that have been made by the science community that actually support whatever's happening in that country of the day. So whether it's phrenology that we mentioned earlier or eugenics for a lot of things that have gone on. And so it's meant that actually, having different types of people in that space has kind of not been what the folks in power have necessarily wanted. And so where you have things like elitism, that's been done to help preserve the order and preserve who is there and is dominating in that space. And we still see that a little bit today in some kind of corners, in some academic spaces, where there are particular people that have been there for a long time and that no one wants to challenge, but also who feel like there is a particular set of characteristics that a true scientist, that a top scientist should have, and act accordingly in their interactions with the people that they have within their departments. So I think that's definitely something that if we go to kind of academic science, obviously industry comes out of that. So there's a lot of these kind of cultural things that have been inherited. I think it's a really, really great question, actually, part 2, which is what can you do, Henson? I think that the greatest thing for you to do is to be an active bystander. So if you're going into this field, even if you're not going into this field, get to learn, get to understand who the different types of people that can contribute to science and have contributed to science. Have a listen out, have a look through the different documentaries, different resources. We have the Stemettes zine as well that we give out, role models and a lot on our social medias all the time. So get to kind of challenge your own norms and your own assumptions about who does science. And then when you do see these things happening, which you will, I'm sure, see whether you're in science or not, get used to calling them out, right? Get used to saying, maybe that joke's not funny. Get used to saying, actually, I'd rather have this person, or why don't we tell that story? Or why don't we value, and I want to hear what this person has to say and contribute to this conversation. So that would be my main thing to do. Don't be an active bystander. Clue yourself up, get learning. You don't have to read my book, but there'll be lots of different resources out there for you to learn a little bit about the different types of folks that could be in science and should be contributing. And then you have your own sphere of influence. And I think it's definitely something that's good that the age that you're already thinking about this. So by the time you do become that leader, because who knows, why wouldn't you become a leader? Coming from the space that you're in now, you're able to make those challenges from the top, and you're able to affect cultures and change the norms for lots of people that are within your sphere of influence. So that would be my answer to your question, Henson. Great question.
Great answer. And our second question for you is from another student, and this is what they asked.
Hello, Dr. Anne-Marie. My name is Nishal. I'm a student at Queen Ethelburga's, and I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to ask you, since you're a child prodigy yourself, that if you take any child between the ages of 3 to 4 years old and train them from a very young age, that they can become a child prodigy as well.
Great question. Yes. I mean, disclaimers or kind of terms and conditions apply. But yeah, I do genuinely believe every child's a genius. And it might not necessarily be maths or what I did, but there's no reason why it couldn't, especially 3 and 4. Like, that's a really young age. Like, there's a lot, they're like sponges at that age. But I do believe that actually, given the opportunity, lots more folks could have that child prodigy experience. It's something I really firmly believe in. It's partly why we do certifications at the moment at Stemettes. So, the Agile, the Cyber, and the Python that I mentioned earlier are real certifications that people genuinely in industry pay thousands of pounds to be able to gain. The PCEP, the IC Agile Fundamentals, and with Cyber, Oracle Net Academy Cyber course that folks do. But these are real courses that are done by real people in industry. And we get groups of teenagers to do them every half term. There's at least 10 that are doing at least one of those qualifications, and they pass them, and it's no big deal. And we've been doing that for the last couple of years now. So yeah, I mean, why wouldn't we be able to get a 3 to 4 year old at some point in their life before 16 to pass a GCSE? Yeah, like that's not hard.
Do you think that in that sense, kids are born kind of with this innate ability, or do you think that it can essentially be taught and it's actually, kids are just like sponges essentially?
It's a bit of both. I mean, everybody's curious and it just ends up being beaten out of you in different ways, right? Everyone's curious. It's just the curiosity to follow that along. It's not that everyone should do GCSE maths at 10, but there are lots of things that people could do at whatever age that works for them. And that doesn't work for a system because you need everybody to do similar things. Otherwise, supposedly the system would fall apart. It wouldn't, but supposedly it would. But I think, given the right opportunity, many more folks could have that. I don't think I'm special. I know I'm not special now because we run Stemettes and people do it every half term. So I know I'm not special. I was just given the right opportunity at the right time and was in the right mood.
Yeah. A curious move.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's very humble of you to kind of have that.
No, it's the truth. Genuine, like, I mean, you know, up until then I didn't have, but now we've literally have had people that have gone through it. You know, one of the girls that wrote back did the Agile course. There's one of the youngest Agile Scrum Masters actually was in the pilot program that we ran. And that's now what she does for her career and earns a load of money doing it. So it's not, I genuinely don't think I'm that special. I genuinely don't think I'm special. Like maybe a little bit, maybe like top 50%, but I don't think I'm that much higher than that. And there's thousands of young people that we've had that have gone through this, and we don't pre-select for Stemettes. Mm-hmm. So you need to be free on that day and able to get to the venue. And even then, most of the time we'll pay for your travel. So that's it. We're not like, oh, you must have done a G shit. Like, no, like, are you free this half term? Do you want an Agile qualification? Come on then. That's literally it.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of like opens up so that, you know, really anyone can get into maths and science, and really you just have to have that sort of passion for it, or just decide whether you like it.
Have the free time, come and get some free food, and then we'll work on the passion bit.
Yeah, fair enough. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Anne-Marie. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you and to meet you. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on our podcast today. Would you like to kind of plug to our audience or tell them a bit about your book and where they can get it online?
Yeah, so She's in Control, available in all good bookshops and booksellers and online, and in audiobook as well as hardback. And they can also listen to Women Tech Charge, my podcast too, if you're a podcasty kind of person.